Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about issue number 1 of X-Men Red, written by Al Ewing. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. Now with that said, this issue opens just before the Hellfire Gala, when the great Arakko was still just an island. For when we get there, we are met by two warriors battling for the stewardship of Arakko in the pouring rain. For the lightning goddess herself is going toe-to-toe with the previous ruler, the shape-shifting queen, Nameless. For in the circle perilous nothing is given, because everything must be earned through individual strength, which also includes the throne. So with Arakko on the line, Nameless lets Storm know that there is no possible way for her to win, for she proclaims to be the goddess in her prime. But regardless of Nameless' words, Storm is not deterred from what she must accomplish. So with grace and skill, Storm manages to dodge and twist away from her adversary's strikes, just managing to stay one step ahead. So with pure rage and fury, Nameless states that Arakko doesn't belong to Storm, for she did not suffer in the prison and shed blood alongside her people. Which in that regard she is 100% right, but just because Storm didn't fight alongside them, didn't mean she had no battles of her own. For Storm states that she fought battles you know nothing of, and as for Nameless having her abilities, Storm claps back by saying, yes, you may have my power but not my experience, and just like that Storm proved her mastery over the weather, by slowly freezing the fluids in Nameless' body, until her body was no longer responding. Now with Nameless completely defenseless, Storm descended from the sky and expressed how she doesn't desire to kill her enemy, but rather she would prefer Nameless to yield and let her take the seat without further bloodshed. But in true Arakko fashion, Nameless manages to teach Storm one important lesson that she must understand in order to become queen. And that is the cost of leadership. Because from above a massive lightning strike struck Nameless, killing her instantly. For like I said earlier in this video, everything must be earned, not given. So following the transition of power, we pick up 3 days later as the Great Ring is deliberating on the future of the Arakko people, for after the Ten of Swords event, Arakko traveled back to our reality, leaving them in a state of flux. Because before this council sits two choices, A. Return back to Amenth and continue their ancient war against their enemies, as the law of Genesis demands, or B. Start a new beginning on a new planet. Which was something Iska the Unbeaten wasn't a fan of doing, for in a mocking manner she states that this responsibility will fall on Storm the Queen of Arakko, to ultimately decide. On the following panel, Storm quickly corrects Iska, by saying she isn't their queen but their new regent, for they are now a council, so all decisions should not be hers alone. Which was something Iska was not willing to accept, as she continued the subtle jabs towards Storm, stating, would that not please you? After you went through such troubles? Isn't your throne comfortable, O voice of soul? So with that said, we fast forward to the current day, to planet Arakko, with the Fisher King walking upon a trail alone, when a voice from above asks him if this was his land. Now on the next page, this voice is revealed to be the master of magnetism, Magneto, and in the beginning, the Fisher King wasn't sure if Eric's intentions were in the right place, given the fact that Magneto didn't introduce himself. But quickly he did just that, before he went on to inquire about the land due to how secluded the area was. For in his words, this location would make a perfect home. So after a brief conversation, the Fisher King eventually asked him if he wanted to talk about his problems. Now this threw Eric completely off, because he was under the assumption that the Arakkis frowned upon weakness. Which couldn't be further from the truth, for the Fisher King states, how could you be strong if you won't heal what's broken? How do you heal without saying where it hurts? So with his point made, Magneto began to unload all his problems while constructing his new home. He tells him that he tried to build something great, something perfect, something to balance all he has lived through. But ultimately it was all lost, but when he tried to wrestle his dream into the world and make it real, it ended up breaking apart and shattering to pieces. So at the end of the day, there are those who see him as a monster, so to him it is easier to pretend that they are wrong, because what can he really say to the truth? Because in Eric's eyes, they are correct to believe what they think. So because of that, he decided to live separate from society in a comfortable grave to die, or better known as, his new home, the Autumn Palace. Now as Magneto and the Fisher King enters Eric's new home, we then jump over to the Red Lagoon where we see Robert DaCosta having a small conversation with an Arakko. And strangely enough, they are bonding over love lost, for both of their lovers met an untimely end, so right before they were about to cheer in their honor, a noise from the entrance of the bar caught their attention. For Vulcan stood at the entrance of the bar with a Shi'ar diplomat in hand. Now this poor individual attempted to let Vulcan know that he and his fellow Shi'ar have diplomatic immunity granted by the regent of Arakko, Storm. But see, Vulcan wasn't trying to hear that, because in his eyes he is still the ruling king of the Shi'ar, for he was killed and brought back via the resurrection process. So with that said, he goes on to claim that Gladiator usurped his throne and gave it to Xandra X Xavier, who just so happens to be Charles X Xavier and Lilandra's daughter. So as tensions began to build in the Red Lagoon, Robert DeCasta stood from his seat to address the conflict in his bar, for he doesn't like any shenanigans in his establishment unless he was the one to start it. Now, given the interruption, Vulcan completely lost interest in the Shi'ar diplomat and turned his full attention over to Sunspot, so as the two individuals stare each other down, Vulcan states that he has indeed heard of him and the way he is powered by solar energy, which is kind of in a way similar to himself, for Vulcan can absorb energy from anything that produces it, which includes taking it from Sunspot himself, so in a mad dash Vulcan lunges at DeCasta in an attempt to punch him with a fist construct made of pure energy, but due to his great reaction time, he was able to avoid the opening attack. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to do the same with the ensuing backhand, for that strike sent Sunspot flying to the opposite side of the bar. But quickly DeCasta returns to his feet because unlike Vulcan, Robert has experienced fighting without his powers. Now, right before round 2 of their battle kicked off, Vulcan claims to be Krakoa royalty, based on the fact that he is a Summers, which was the wrong thing to do. Because as soon as he said that, a massive hand landed on his shoulder as John Proutstar asked if he knew Cyclops. And right after he said yes, a mean right hook landed square dead center in his jaw, which knocked Vulcan to the ground. And before he could recover, Proutstar ripped a table from the ground and continued to hit him again with it in the back of his head. So as you may have guessed, the Iraqi onlookers weren't down with the interference, for the challenge wasn't directed towards John Proutstar. But before the crowd could grow out of control, Cable and Abigail arrived on the scene, because the diplomat from earlier called for help, given the fact that their safety falls under the watch of Sword. So the first thing the two did after arriving was to incapacitate Vulcan with a telekinetic choke, for Cable surmises that perhaps Cyclops will be able to penetrate his baby brother's mania, as they discuss future employment for him. Now this didn't sit well with Proutstar, for we all know Vulcan tendencies towards people in general. So with heat once again building up between two people, Cable and Proutstar was at a standstill as both men were strong within their feelings. For while the two were deep in conversation, Cable surmises that perhaps Proutstar could take a few pointers from his own younger brother James, the mutant known as Warpath. Now this pissed John off because he replied by bringing up how proud he was of his brother, and what he has accomplished with his life, and how he would have stopped him from turning his brother into a soldier if he was there. But that's when Cable clapped back by saying, "But you weren't, because you were too busy catching a plane." Which is a huge jab at past events, but perhaps it isn't entirely unwarranted, because Proutstar was reckless and threw his life away with careless abandonment simply to prove a point. Because in the past, he clearly wasn't thinking about his brother or anyone but himself when he attacked that plane. He only wanted to prove that he had the strength to take Nefaria down on his own. Still, it's a pity all this animosity continues to brew, because the beef has long been squashed on Cyclops' end. So with that said, Abigail stepped between the two titans and told Cable to take Vulcan to the brig, and as for Proutstar, his Martian privileges were rescinded. So as Cable and Abigail exit the Red Lagoon with Vulcan, John Proutstar lets it be known to DeCasta that he will most definitely return because, in his words, One-Eye Jr. just made it real personal. So as John takes his leave, he tells DeCasta to watch his back, for this place is rotten from the head down. So with that event coming to a close, we jump over to the Great Ring, where Storm and Iska the Unbeaten were walking and having a conversation about current events. And throughout their exchange, Iska made sure to continue to throw jabs in the Regent direction just to get on her nerves. Because at the end of the day, Iska isn't one to put your faith into, given the fact that her power makes her switch sides depending on whoever wins, for she could never lose. So when it came to Storm asking her why she chose to abstain from her vote, she replied by saying if she would have voted then that would be the direction their people will go, and because of that she chose to just watch. because she wanted to see how Storm was going to navigate this new peaceful era. So with that said, their conversation came to an end, while Abigail emerged from the shadows to speak to Storm. Now the purpose of Abigail being there is to bring up an idea, to bring up a proposal about how Arakko needs a team to control influence on Mars. Because as of right now, there are roaming groups of bandits that do as they please on the planet. And the team she proposes is their own version of the X-Men. Because throughout mutant society, the X-Men were seen as cultural ambassadors that always set a good example. But in an odd twist of events, Storm shoots down the idea, for she believes the X-Men is a symbol for Krakoa, not Arakko, because Arakko is a culture of itself. So with Storm speaking her mind, she enters the throne room of Arakko with one goal on her mind, for throughout this whole comic one thing was constantly brought up, and that was the status of her title as Queen or Regent. So as she removes her crown, she thinks back to the conversation she had with Nameless before she claimed her spot. For one thing that Storm never really wanted to be was Queen to begin with, for she wanted a new path forward for the Iraqi people. And the only way to solidify that was to ensure that Arakko have no thrones and no crowns moving forward. So in a display of power, Storm brought down a lightning strike on top of the seat of power, completely destroying it. For in her words, there are greater things to be than a queen. So following that declaration with Storm, we skip to our last event in this comic, and that was a few days later in the Autumn Palace. And when we get there, we see the Fisher King talking with Eric about how empty his castle is in a joking manner. Which Magneto responds back with the same energy, saying that he has the power of magnetism, not decoration, which led him to ask the Fisher King about his mutant ability. Which, funny enough, he discloses that he doesn't have one, which shocked the hell out of Magneto. For Magneto asked if he was a human, which the Fisher King quickly shoots down, for humans are from Earth, and he was born in the prisons. For in the Fisher King's own words, it takes more than powers to be an Iraqi. So as the conversation continued, out of nowhere, Sunspot entered the room, which prompted Magneto to ask DeCasto how did he know that he was there. Which Robert states that he has eyes and ears on all the comings and goings of Arakko. So with that said, DeCosta had a proposition for both Magneto and the Fisher King, which Magneto initially quickly shot down, for he was done creating utopias. Which was exactly what he wanted to hear. For he continues to tell them how Abigail Brand has a plan up her sleeves to build Arakko in her own image, which was something the Fisher King and Magneto were fully against. And because they were fully against it, he offers them the spot as headmasters of a new X-Men type team, which was ironic, because at that moment another voice calls out from the door. Because that person also came there to offer a similar proposition to the two men, but she wasn't looking for an X-Men, because that was what Brand was building. But rather she wanted to create an Iraqi balance to defend the broken land. She wanted a Brotherhood. So with that said, issue number 1 of X-Men Red comes to an end. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.